Good morning, church. Please remain standing for a reading from God's Word. My name is Louis Breedlove. I get to serve as a missional community leader, and I get to bring the Word for you this morning. Read it, not bring it. Matt will do that. All right. It's out of Luke 5:12 through 16. While he was in one of the cities, there came a man full of leprosy. And when he saw Jesus, he fell on his face and begged him, "Lord, if you will, you can make me clean." And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, "I will, be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. And he charged him to tell no one, but go and show yourself to the priest and make an offering for your cleansing, as Moses commanded, for a proof to them. But now even more the report about him went abroad, and great crowds gathered to him to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities. But he would withdraw to desolate places and pray. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Please be seated.
Well, I remember vividly when I was in sixth grade, and as a sixth grade boy, right, the only thing that matters in the entire world is to be cool, right? And that's all that I cared about. And there was a kid in my class who was, in my opinion, and everyone else's opinion, like he was that kid. He was the cool kid. And like he did everything that was cool, especially as a sixth grade boy. Like this is not an exaggeration. He was a sponsored paintball player. And so like of all the sixth grade boys, that's like royalty. Like he would go and travel and play paintball competitively. He was the best soccer player in the grade. He was made good grades. Like he was charismatic. Like, man, Evan was his name. Everyone wanted to be like Evan, including me. Like it was all just like, that's what we needed to do. Just kind of conform your life as best you can and aspire to be like Evan. Well, I remember one day in sixth grade in humanities class, noticing something different about how Evan wrote the letter A in his handwriting. And I thought, you know what? I'm trying to be like Evan. I'm going to start writing my A's that way. I've been writing the letter A for a long time. I used to write them like that. And then in sixth grade, I started writing my A's like that because Evan did. And I was like, I'm going to do this now. And now I write my A's like that all the time. And I couldn't, like the number of times I've done that just because I was trying to be like someone that I aspired to. And was like every minute detail of this kid's life, I want to adopt. Like if in some way that makes me cooler, it didn't make me any better at paintball, but I was more like this person that I was trying to be like. And here's what, like, I always think about that when I think about this topic of spiritual formation. Because like we've said throughout this series, God is trying to conform us into the image of Jesus. Over the course of our life, he's like we've seen with the sculpture, he's carving away all of the superfluous material, and he's trying to lead us into a life where we are like his son Jesus, where we emulate him, where we feel like Jesus felt, where we live like Jesus lived, we think like he thought, we treat others like he treated them in all areas of life. And so we, over the course of our Christian life, we're trying to be more like Jesus, not for the sake of being cool, but for the sake of our eternal vocation as bearing his image in God's new creation. But here's where I think a lot of us, myself included, miss how spiritual formation works as we follow Jesus and as we seek to be more like him. See, oftentimes we listen to Jesus's teachings. Like we read his teachings and we go, okay, I'm going to try and adopt that into my life. I'm going to try and obey his teachings. I'm going to follow his teachings. And that's a huge part of it. But one of the things that I think we miss is that we fail to consider what it means to emulate Jesus, not just in what he taught, but in what he did. Like we actually read the account of how Jesus lived, and then we go, I'm going to pay attention to every little thing about how Jesus interacted with people, about how Jesus spent his time, about how Jesus prayed, about how Jesus, it's not just what he taught, but what he did. And we say, I'm going to take his life and copy it onto mine. I'm going to watch how Jesus wrote his letter A, and I'm going to try and do the exact same thing so that I might be like him. And so in many ways, I think the disconnect for us in a lot of like trying to follow Jesus and trying to be like Jesus is we miss this component. We say, okay, Jesus says to do these things, and I'm going to listen to his teaching, but what does it mean to then observe on the pages of the Gospels who he was and what he was like, and how do I emulate that kind of life, and how does that play a role in my spiritual formation? I really appreciate the way that Dallas Willard says it. He says, and in this truth lies the secret of the easy yoke, the yoke that Jesus offers us. He says the secret involves living as he lived in the entirety of his life, adopting his overall lifestyle. Our mistake is to think that following Jesus consists in loving our enemies, going the second mile, turning the other cheek, suffering patiently and hopefully, while living the rest of our lives just as everyone around us. So in other words, you hear Jesus say things like, love your enemies, or do not be anxious. And we go, okay, I'm gonna like try really hard to not be anxious. And what does that do? It makes me really anxious about how anxious I am. But instead, it's, hey, what does it mean to not be anxious? Well, yes, of course, there's the teaching, but then how does Jesus live his life in a non-anxious way? See, our issue is that we hear do not be anxious, but then we live at the pace of the world, or we live according to the values of the world, or we try and interact with people as the world interacts with people, and then we go, okay, somehow in all of that pace and all those priorities, I'm just supposed to kind of cherry pick Jesus' teaching of do not be anxious and like shove it in and just try really hard. But what Jesus does so graciously is he says, okay, I'm gonna tell you not to be anxious, and I'm going to show you what a life pattern looks like that leads you into a non-anxious life. But you're going to have to put one foot in front of the other just as I do. You're going to have to start writing your A's just like I do. And so that's what I want to look at today as we talk about these spiritual disciplines or these practices, these life rhythms, these life habits that form us into the image of Jesus. This is one that is not so much taught by Jesus, but is shown, that is modeled by Jesus. And we say, okay, this is what Jesus did as he patterned his life after being one with God and living the perfect human life. So we must as well. And it's one of, maybe if not the most, countercultural, yet most important in our day. Look at Luke 5, verse 15 and 16. But now, even more the report about him went abroad, and great crowds gathered to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities. But he would withdraw to desolate places and pray. He would withdraw to desolate places and pray. Central to Jesus' lifestyle, the lifestyle that we must adopt if we are going to be like him, is the regular habit of solitude. The regular habit of being alone with his heavenly Father. And it says often he would. So this isn't just like, oh, one time he did. This is as the crowds gathered, Jesus would go off by himself to pray. As the demands of life increased, as the demands of his ministry increased, as the fame that he garnered increased, he would more often withdraw to desolate places and pray. This word for desolate places is the Greek word eremos. It means quiet place or solitary place, or even wilderness. But when you think wilderness, it's not just talking about the kind of terrain. It means away from everything and everyone else. Like, that's why it's translated desolate or solitary in most translations. Jesus would often find the eremos. He would find the place where no one else was, where no other inputs were, where no other distractions were, and he would regularly, as a part of his life, go be alone with the Father in these places. So we talked about last week how there's all different kinds of prayer. And this is like a specific one that Jesus adopted, a slow, undistracted prayer that is removed from anyone or anything else. So Jesus teaches us how to pray with his words. We looked at that last week when he says, when you pray, pray like this. And he gives us the beautiful Lord's Prayer. So he gives us a template for the words of prayer. But here, he's also showing us with his life how to pray in his own prayer habits, showing us the kind of prayer that requires solitude And without this kind of prayer, without this habit of solitude, we have no hope of actually living the kind of life that God created us to live. We cannot become like Jesus if we do not adopt his whole lifestyle into our lives. As Henry Nouwen says, without solitude, it is virtually impossible to live a spiritual life. So I want to look at this specifically, again, through the lens of formation. Why is the discipline of solitude so important, and how is it actually forming us? We'll talk practically, briefly at the end, and kind of like how to kind of maybe structure this into our lives. But I want to just like really press on us why this matters, because I think for most of us, we're sitting in this room and going like, okay, alone time, and there's probably two camps like, yeah, that would be nice, Pastor. I would love that. And then there's this other camp of like, I don't know. I don't know if that's that important. And so wherever you kind of find yourself, I want to just really press on us. Here's why the discipline of solitude is essential to our spiritual formation. And it's just two reasons. Yeah, not even three. You can do two. Number one, solitude creates space for God to work. Solitude is what creates the space for God to do the work that only he can do in our hearts. So it says, but even now the report about him went abroad, great crowds gathered to be healed of their infirmities, but he would withdraw to desolate places, and it doesn't stop there. He would withdraw to desolate places and pray. The desolate place, the solitude, was a means to an end so that he could actually have the space with his heavenly Father to commune and to experience that fellowship that was essential to Jesus' character and life. Last week I talked about how when I was about fifth grade, went to the McDonald Observatory out in Fort Davis, Texas, and it's like one of the darkest places in the entire world. And you can see the night sky, like what the night sky actually looks like, and how incredible that is. Well, I remember the drive out there was less incredible. Okay, fifth grade. This is before iPhones, before that you could carry around a computer in your pocket. And so, but we thought, me and my buddy, we were going out there with my grandparents, and we thought that we were prepared. And we had this portable DVD player. You remember those? And we had a couple movies that we were gonna watch in the backseat of their car. And then we show up and we're loading in the car, utter devastation. We forgot to charge it. And they didn't have a car charger. And so we were like, that's okay, we'll pivot. So then we said, hey, grandmother, could we have your phone? And at that time, that meant like a Nokia that we could play Snake on. But hey, it was a screen, it was something. And then she uttered the haunting words, oh, your granddaddy and I, we don't have cell phones. And so we loaded in the car for an 8-hour drive out to West Texas with exactly zero electronic assistance in the car. And like, I say that today, like to my kids, and they're like, it's a horror story, right? Which is pretty normal back then. And then they'd be like, what did you do? And it was like, you looked. You just looked at things. That was what you did. Or if it was raining and you were lucky enough, you could find 2 raindrops on the window and you'd have little raindrop races. And you'd make bets on which raindrop would reach the other side of the window first. This was the life, that we grew up in. And friends, it's not that way anymore. We know this. We know that that's not the case. We know that that's not the world we live in. And it's not just kids. Guys, it's us. Like, we know this. One study, and this is fascinating. I double, triple check this across so many different sources. The average American touches their phone 2,600 times a day. Average. So if you're like, oh, I probably am on it more than most, there's your median. 77% of Americans, and I think that number is filled with some liars who are lying about this, said that they instinctively would reach for their phones at any moment of stillness or inactivity. 80%, and I think it's probably higher. And here's we're gonna beat a dead horse here, because we're gonna talk about this a lot. But I wanna just say, phones, they're not evil in themselves, but we are fooled if we do not consider how they are used by evil. If we do not consider how they are used by the evil one who hates you and does not want you to become like Jesus. So the distraction of our age is preventing us from ever experiencing any moment where God can actually do the heart and soul work that he wants to do in our lives. This is why, this is such a haunting line. I love this in the Screw Tape Letters. C.S. Lewis, when he's talking from the perspective of Satan and the demons. And he says Satan's goal, he says what his aim is for the world, is we will make the whole universe a noise in the end, is the line that he has for Satan. Noise, distractedness, these are not just neutral byproducts of an advancing world. They are intentional weapons of warfare from a real and a spiritual enemy. And it's working. Here's how Andrew Sullivan says it. He says, this new epidemic of distraction is our civilization's specific weakness. And its threat is not so much to our minds, even as they shapeshift under the pressure. The threat is to our souls. And at this rate, if the noise does not relent, we might forget we even have any. Or Ronald Rolheiser says it more succinctly, we are distracting ourselves into spiritual oblivion. Why does Satan want the world filled with noise? Because God does his work in the stillness and the quiet. And so if he can just fill your life with enough noise, he can prevent you from ever experiencing the real, deep, soul-level, lasting, transformative work that God wants to do in your heart. This is why it says Jesus withdrew to the desolate places to pray. The communion with God, the work of God was the goal that he was after. The desolate places is the necessary medium for that to happen. Finding silence and solitude is not just about mindfulness. It's about creating space for God to do the real work, the hard work in our hearts, the work that only he can do. Now, this is why we tend to avoid it. Because you know the feeling, you know why you instinctively reach for your phone. You get to a red light and you're like, okay, I'm alone with my thoughts, red alert. I'm just panicking. And so I need to do something. I need to open this app, close it, open this app, close it, open this app, close it. Oh, the light's green and you're fine, right? Because all of a sudden the worries of life start to cave in. Or worse yet, those feelings of shame or guilt, frustration, that resentment that you feel toward that person that you're not really sure you're supposed to feel resentment toward. All of a sudden you're confronted with it. And so what do? We numb, we distract, we sedate our minds and our souls with noise because it's so much easier to pay attention to everything that's out there than it is to face and sit with and lay bare before God what's in here. That's why we avoid the quiet, the solitude, the stillness, because it's uncomfortable, it's vulnerable, and it's where God does his best work. And so this is why, even particularly, this is the danger within even the people of God and the church is to actually put so much focus on what is out there, even in good ways. There's a lot of noise right now about the state of the world and about good and evil and about what's happening in our country and abroad. There's so much content to be consumed, so many sound bites that are being shared, commented on. But none of it matters if you don't actually sit before God and say, Lord, what about my heart? We can share all the clips in the world about what it means to be a godly husband and father. None of it matters if you won't sit before God and confess your own sins and invite him into those corners of your life that you want to avoid. That is where the heart work happens. We are not changed through information. The crucible of change is communion with God himself. That's where he can uproot our idols, heal our wounds, convict us of sin, give us real hope. We cannot spend our days splashing around in the shallows of information and entertainment and then expect God to do the deep work of change that we want him to do. I love this quote from C.S. Lewis. He says, in our time and place, avoiding God is extremely easy. By the way, he's writing this several decades ago. Avoid silence, avoid solitude, avoid any train of thought that leads off the beaten track. Keep the radio on, as if a radio was the only thing we had to worry about today. Live in a crowd. But here's the good news. Here's the good news. This is what Jesus shows us. Avoiding God is easy, but friends, so is finding him. And so I want to just kind of take that quote and I want to just tweak a couple things, and not a direct quote from Lewis, but hear the inverse of this. In our time and place, finding God is extremely easy. Seek silence. Seek solitude. Follow any train of thought that leads off the beaten track. Turn off the radio. Get away from the crowd. C.S. Lewis. Make the space for him to work, and he will do the work. Number 2, solitude reminds us of our need for God. We have to make a discipline of solitude because we need to be reminded of our need for God. But now even more, the report about him went abroad, and great crowds gathered to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities. But he would withdraw to desolate places and pray. If one side of the coin to our lack of solitude before God is our distractedness, the other side of the coin that prevents us from experiencing solitude with God is our pride. At the root of so much of our busyness and the frenetic pace that we live at and the avoidance of solitude is, I love you, a false sense of self-importance. Oftentimes, we pack our schedules to the brim out of the belief that far more revolves around us or depends on us than what actually does. We live under this illusion that if I don't keep all these things in my schedule, if I don't say yes to all the expectations that the world seems to have on me, if I don't do enough for the people in my life, then the world's going to fall apart and the kingdom of God is going to collapse. And of course, we wouldn't articulate that. But then as soon as someone says, hey, why don't you slow down? We kind of scoff at the idea. Hey, why don't you just stop? Stop when? When am I going to be free to stop if not everything else is not going to stop around me? And it creates this frenetic pace that we all feel. I saw this meme the other day and I loved it. Me, extremely burnt out. I should take the day off and relax. Also me, I wonder if there's a way I could make this relaxing more productive. Many of you in this room resonate with that. Like I saw that and I was like, ooh, okay, yeah. Like, okay, well, if I relax, then I could probably also do this. Then I could listen to like a podcast, times 2 speed, of course. And like, I know, really optimize like my relaxing time. Because even in our relaxing, we think that it's about achieving. Because we live under this illusion. We have this idea, this lie in our hearts that says you don't have the luxury of being alone with God. And here's what I just want to say so clearly, so succinctly, and that please, if you hear nothing else today, you need God more than other people need you. And I know there's about half the people in this room that already went, yeah, but. So I'm going to say it again. You need God more than other people need you. This is why Jesus' example here is so helpful, friends. Because if there's anyone in the entire world, in all of human history, that could say, yeah, but, it's Jesus. If there's anyone in the entire human race who could have ever said, I can't be alone with God. I don't have the time. I don't have the margin. It's not that I can't make it happen because I'm too needed, too much depends on me. It's Jesus. He actually is building the church. He actually is on the throne of the world. He actually is the Savior of all people. And yet, he would often withdraw to desolate places and pray. I mean, even just the story, like he heals a leper. like something that was like a truly an unprecedented miracle. Shockwaves go out throughout the ancient world. And all of a sudden, hey, did you hear about this Jesus? And then like more people are coming to him. The crowds are coming, which then probably all of his followers are like, oh my gosh, this is it. The Messiah is like off to the races. We got the following. We garnered all the momentum that we want to do. Your fame is spreading. The crowds are coming in. Jesus, we're all in. What are you going to do? I'm going to go up that mountain. No one follow me. And I'm going to go spend a day praying. Probably longer. And now don't be mistaken. Jesus was busy. He had a full schedule. This was just part of it. Because he knew what the non-negotiable thing was. He knew that he couldn't do his ministry without spending alone time with God. He knew that he couldn't sustain the way that people needed him if he didn't spend alone time with God in prayer. Charles Spurgeon was once reflecting on Martin Luther's view of this, and I love this. He says, I like that saying of Martin Luther when he says, I have so much business to do today that I shall not be able to get through it with less than 3 hours of prayer. Now, most people would say, I have so much business to do today that I only have 3 minutes for prayer. I cannot afford the time. But Luther thought that the more he had to do, the more he must pray, or else he could not get through it. That is a blessed kind of logic. Now, I always want to like caveat a little bit, like, you know, back in Martin Luther's time, it's like when you had to go to bed when the sun went down. There was no internet. There was no like, it was a little easy. We can just be honest, like it was easier to find the quiet time. But the approach of, man, I have so much that depends on me that I need to depend on God all the more, is backwards to how we often approach it. I want to just give us a little grid to help us like think through this, because this has been really helpful for me, and I'm just going to pay it forward. I want to talk real practically here as you just kind of think through, like as you feel the pressures of the world around you, and as you think through how to build this into your schedule. Here's a grid, kind of like how to think through this, and it's a grid that maps urgency and importance, because our issue in our world is that we conflate the two. We conflate urgency with importance. We assume that if something is urgent, or we believe that something's urgent, that it is most important. And we live our lives through the lens of urgency rather than through the lens of importance. And what Jesus did was he said, I know what's most important, and so I will, even if someone thinks that something is more urgent, I'm going to stick to what's important and then allow the other things to fall into place. So top left. Urgent and important, medical emergency. If you're in the middle of your quiet time and you break your leg somehow, go to the hospital. Like that's fine. Like don't be like, no, actually this is most important, Lord. Like that's not wise, right? He'll understand. You can come back to it. So medical emergencies, yeah, that is both urgent and important. Deal with it appropriately. Then you get into the bottom left though, where there's things that we treat as urgent that are not important. And I just put that text message. You know what text message it is. You know the inputs, you know the emails, you know the things that you all of a sudden, like your phone dings and you're like, I cannot move on in my brain space and in my body and in my day without addressing that thing. Even if the thing itself is not ultimately important, right? But there's this urgency that we feel that just creates because of the pace of the world that we're in. So we're often pulled into unimportant things in the grand scheme of things because they are presented to us as urgent. Then you have the bottom right, and this isn't like a knock on entertainment. Entertainment's fine. But if we're honest, it's not urgent and it's not that important. And so we get caught up in this where we get pulled even into non-urgent, non-important things. And then God help us, so much of the important things in life live in that top right quadrant where they are really important. But because we do not see them or treat them as urgent, as pressing, we don't make time for them. We don't schedule the time for it. We don't build it into our lives because we're constantly either responding to the things that are urgent or we're sucked in and distracted into the things that are unimportant. But friends, the life that Jesus lived was a life that said, yes, I'm busy, but I'm not going to live at the demands of what everyone else expects as urgent. I know what's important. And what's most important is my relationship with my Heavenly Father. And so I will carve out the time. I will get away to the desolate places. I will spend time with God where there's no other distractions, because it is what ultimately matters, and it's what anchored him as he then poured out in the rest of his life for other people. This is why this is such an important discipline. It's why using the word discipline or practice is not wrong or bad, because oftentimes it requires intentionality to build it into our lives even when we don't feel like it. Because our natural state is to be pulled right toward the urgent or to be distracted down into the unimportant. But it takes effort, it takes friction to work our way up to important, non-urgent things. And this is why we intentionally build the discipline of solitude into our lives, because we need to intentionally teach our hearts that our biggest need is God himself, and that our identity is on what we receive from him, not what others receive from us. So much of our anxiousness, so much of our worry, so much of our anger, it comes from this lie, that I'm too needed. I'm too important. Too much is depending on my performance. And so we respond and we react to things all through our lives rather than proactively going before God and allowing him to do the work in our heart. I mean, you probably can relate to this. I know. There are times when I am impatient with my children. And the thing that they are doing, it's like, would I rather them obey? Yes. Would I rather not have to ask them to put on their shoes 6 times? Maybe 5, that'd be great. That's awesome. But here's the deal. I know that sometimes based on my reaction, it's not really about the shoes. It's that I have a false sense of self-importance, and there's something else going on in the world that I think I'm too crucial for, and that I'm stressed about for some reason, or that I think is resting on my shoulders, or that God can't handle it without my presence. And so I'm anxious or worried or preoccupied about something that is not even in my home or in that moment in front of me. And then what happens? Then I get irritated and impatient with the people that are right in front of me, not really because of what they're doing, but because I won't stop and slow down and go spend time with the Lord away from everything and have him remind me, you're not that important, Matt. There's not that much depending on you. Actually, you are dependent on me. This is why I love Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. If you won't be still, you won't know that he's God. The stillness is the means by which we see God for who he really is. Because the subtext of that verse is, be still, know that I am God, and know that you are not. And it is in stillness and solitude that we actually teach that to our hearts. Because it's really easy to say, yeah, God, you're God and I'm not, while we go on pretending that things actually rest on us, while we go on pretending and acting like we actually are God. It's the discipline of solitude that trains our souls to see God as God and depend on him instead of on our own strength. It's not what you're naturally going to want to do. You are naturally in your flesh going to want to depend on your own strength. You're going to live your life through the lens of what you are achieving and performing and doing. And it's not until you get away from everything that could possibly depend on you and you recognize how dependent you are on God that your soul actually starts to catch up to that reality. This is what disciplines do. This is what spiritual disciplines are all about. They're telling our hearts and souls something even before we feel it. We know this. If you wait until you find the perfect moment where you go, now I feel like I could finally stop and get away from it all, it'll never happen. If you react your way into this, it will never happen. But if you proactively build the discipline in, you might start to teach your heart what it needs to know about who God is and who you are. And so in this way, the discipline of solitude becomes this incredible way of like rehearsing the gospel to our own hearts. We teach the gospel to our hearts because what's at the core of the gospel? The core of the gospel is the reality that you can't actually save yourself, that the world and your future and your hope and your identity is not dependent on your performance or your works or your goodness, your accomplishments, your achievements. That we're always trying to win the approval of others. Why do we say yes to the things that feel urgent that are not important? Because we don't want to disappoint people. We're constantly living under this search for love and approval. But if we will just stop, get away alone with God, we might hear the whisper from him that says, hey, I love you even when you do nothing. I approve of you, not because of what you are doing. Not because of what you're accomplishing, but because of what I have accomplished for you in the person of Jesus. And I've welcomed you into my family, and I've made you an object of my love and my approval, and you get to just enjoy that. Would you sit and enjoy it for a moment? And it's not until we actually stop in solitude that we can. The problem is that we say, saved by grace alone through faith alone, while then living the rest of our lives as if it depends on our efforts. As if my future depends on me, as if my identity depends on me. So by choosing to stop and to do nothing but be with God, we are realigning our hearts to what we say is true, that what we need and what the world needs most is not my efforts, but the God who saves. So we get away in solitude because it's by getting away in solitude that creates the space for God to work and that then teaches our hearts, that reminds our hearts that we are dependent on him. So as we close, I want to just talk practically real quick, last few minutes. Like how can we do this? Because again, this is one of those things where it's like, okay, I feel the importance of it. I feel God calling me to this. I see Jesus do it. So if nothing else, if you're like, I'm still trying to catch up to some of those reasonings, that's fine. Do it because Jesus did it. And we're trying to be like him. But then how does this actually work? 3 things. Here we go. Here's your 3 points. Number 1, plan it. Plan it. Again, we said this before. If you wait until you kind of drift into a state where you're like, I feel zen enough to get away. Like, it's not going to happen in our world. It is so much harder to find the desolate places in our world today. You have to plan it. This is the same with any human relationship. Like if you're married, you understand this about scheduling time or planning time with your spouse. Like we got to put date night on the calendar, right? Because if it's just like, we just happen to find an evening, it won't happen. But if you say, hey, in 16 Fridays from now, call your mom, we're dropping the kids, right? You can do that. So you put it on the calendar and you protect that time. Like, I have no problem if someone says, hey, can we meet? Hey, need you to do this. Hey, no, date night's on the calendar. That's sacred time, right? And we're driving away from Cyprus. I love y'all. I don't want to see you on date night, right? We're going somewhere else in the city because it's like, you got to get away. You got to be able to just be with the person and actually experience uninterrupted time with them. And even with like our kids, like we talk about this. Like, cause we'll say, hey, you guys are going to Maymay's tonight. Like mom and dad are going out and our kids be, we want to go. And it's like, I love that. Like I really do. That's amazing. And then we say with the most love in our hearts and graciously, no. And we try and explain it though. It's like, no, look, mom and dad, we need this time. Like this has to be good for us to be able to love you and care for you well. So we're going to protect it and we're going to do it and we're going to make sure that it happens proactively and we're going to schedule it and plan it. So as you think through your days and your weeks, you got to think through this and plan it. Like when is the time? And then put it on the calendar. When's the time that you're going to do your commute with no music or audiobook or podcast or radio? And you're going to use that time and decide it. And then tell someone that you're going to do it so they can ask, hey, how was that? When's the time that you're going to go for a walk with no phone or no headphones and just spend the time with God? Like for me, like again, you've heard me say this, it's mornings for me. Like it's before everyone else is awake because I'm like, at least if they're all sleeping and unconscious, then they can't make noise, right? That's fine. And so that's a life hack for me. So I get up before everyone and I'm in my chair with my coffee and like that's the time where it really is still and quiet. And it's solitude. Number 2, put the phone away. Again, I'm going to beat the dead horse more. But if you try to do your solitude with every voice in the literal world having access to your space, it's not going to happen. Again, this is where we have to understand that it's harder for us to find a desolate place in our world today than it was for Jesus or anyone else in the ancient world. Like, we were joking about this at staff meeting. We were talking about it. Like, back then, to find a desolate place, you just had to walk like 100 yards. And you were like, oh, there's a desolate place. Like, that was how the world worked. Towns were small. Everything was so spread out. So it was just like walk out of earshot from people and you have solitude with God. It's not our world today. And so we have to know that. So that you have to find the time that you can be disconnected from the digital inputs in your life so that you actually can, I love the way that Lewis said, if you want to avoid God, avoid following those random trains of thought. You need to be able to do that. You need to be able to follow, okay, God, whoa, where'd that come from? Where'd that person come from? I hadn't thought about that person in a while. All right, Lord, why'd you bring them to mind? What do you want to do in my heart? Oh, there's a memory that I hadn't thought about in a long time. Is there something that I need to bring before you? Actually, man, I remember I was wanting to talk to this person about that and I just kept forgetting. Lord, would you give me the words to have this conversation? And it's not until you actually give the space to do that it will actually happen. It is harder to find, but it is still worth doing. We can't just be physically alone. We have to be digitally alone as well. And then number 3, progress gradually. And this is where I want to really encourage you. Be patient with yourself with this. Because again, it's not natural. It's not the normal pace of our world. And so I've talked to people that and I've done this, set a timer for 2 minutes. And I know that sounds comical, but it's not. Set a timer for 2 minutes and just give those 2 minutes of silence and solitude to God. And see what happens. And then you're like, okay, that was fine. I can do 2 minutes. Great, do 5. Set a timer for 5 minutes. Because here's the thing. You're going to set a timer for 20, and it's going to feel like an eternity in our world and our pace. Next time you have a half-hour drive, do the whole thing in silence. Put your phone in the back seat or something. And just really allow yourself to be alone with God and see what happens. But start doing this progressively. In the fitness and exercise world, it's called progressive overload. And so you do a certain number of reps at a certain weight, and you're like, okay, I did that. And then the next week or the next cycle that you do, you just take those little 2.5-pound weights and you put them on the side. And it's basically the same, but a little bit more. And then over time, you do enough of those cycles, and all of a sudden you've added weight to the bar progressively and slowly. Spiritual disciplines work the same way. If you're like, man, I never have alone time with God, don't try and be like, all right, God, Martin Luther said 3 hours, here are my 3 hours. You're going to get discouraged. But you can do 3 minutes. We can all do 3 minutes. And then we can add to it and add to it and add to it and build it into our rhythms, and you'll start to get it, and you'll find the pockets. Again, so I have my mornings, but then on my Sabbath days, I go for walks by myself, and that's a little bit more extended time. And there's just little ways that you can build this in. I'll leave you with this. Revelation 3:20 says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock," Jesus says. "If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him, and he with me." As is the case with all of these disciplines, this is not about convincing Jesus to come to us and to do a work in us. This is about receiving the work that he is eager to do. He is the one who's standing at the door, and he's knocking. And if we will just carve out a moment to be with him, he will come in and he'll do the work in our hearts. The question that we all have to answer is, will we let him in? Will we stop long enough? Will we get away long enough for him to do the work that he's eager to do? Because if you let him in, he will do it. Let's pray.